everyone. My name is Paula, and I am the co-host of the Innovation Blueprint with Webisoft. And today we have John Adcock from WellCheck Systems International. He's the president there. Thank you, John, for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the invitation. Appreciate you guys taking notice of what we're doing.
Yeah, of course. So, John, I'd love to hear from you a little bit more about what got you into the oil and gas industry and what has actually motivated you to stay there for so many years.
Okay. Well, I've told this story a bunch of times on myself, but I was a mechanical engineering student back in the day, building robots. And it was a time downturn in the entire economy. And when I started, every mechanical engineering student had multiple job offers. When I graduated, there were 45 of us in the class and 4 of us had job offers. It was a downturn.
Hmm.
So I fell into oil and gas business by accident, really. I interviewed with a company and pretended like I knew what cementing and fracturing and pressure pumping really was. And they said, well, we like you, but you really don't know what we do for a living. And we'll be back in the spring and come see us. And they didn't come back. That was SLB, Schlumberger back in the day. And another company was doing similar services. And I recognized what they're doing, had looked into that and interviewed with BJ Services. And BJ was building their own equipment. And
Hmm.
what is a cement pump and a blender, if not a robot on wheels, electric over hydraulic. And so I thought that I would get on board with an oil and gas service company and move in their mechanical engineering department and go back to what I was doing, was building robots.
Hmm.
And as time went on, the career path was oil and gas, not this small mechanical engineering department with no career path in Houston. So I stayed in the oil and gas side, and that's how I started here. So I started in an excellent training program. BJ had a fantastic training center and would bring in professors from A&M and other universities to teach classes. So we were taking semester-long classes in 2 weeks and, learning petroleum engineering as a service company employee. So I was a beneficiary of that and began working in customers' offices. So I had a desk in a Conoco, in Chevron, Pennzoil, Marathon, we could go on, Enron before they were EOG, and working as a free engineer for the companies because we were supporting the services that BJ provided. I was with the company about 14 years. I moved into management with BJ, and at at a at a point I was looking for an exit, and I was invited to join Chesapeake Energy and move to operations in the EP side, and did, and so left the service company. I spent 17 years in upstream operations, working. Started in the Permian Basin, Marcellus, Haynesville, all of Oklahoma. Ended up my last 9 years working in Utica in Ohio and running operations. So after about 33 years of beating my head against the operations wall and leaving that, there was a project that I was working on with a vendor, and it was the one thing that while I could retire, I didn't want to leave unfinished. And that was what we're doing. We can talk about what WellCheck is doing here in a
Yeah.
moment, um, but I got in touch with the then president of WellCheck and said, I want to help you. I want to help you move this forward. I want to get this across the goal line. This would be a project that one of the things that I really wouldn't like to see fall by the wayside or fail. And we've been working on this, and go back and give the background to that. And Hank Haynes, now CEO, is also CEO of Sequoia Technologies, now called SEQTEK.
Hmm.
And they do business process software development, AI, those kinds of things. And really, WellCheck was taking a lot of the time that he needed to spend on his mainline consulting business, which is the bread and butter of his company. That's our sister company, SEQTEK.
Hmm.
So I told him I wanted to help him. He said, well, I have a thought on that, if you don't mind. I said, sure, go ahead. He said, well, come be president of the company. I said, Hank, I was planning on retiring.
Yeah.
He said, well, let's talk some more. And we continued to talk. And it became clear that if I wanted this to succeed, it needed someone to put the time in to get it working in a product launch. So WellCheck's been around for a dozen years doing site surveillance. cameras, site security, and these kinds of things. And so this is the next step in evolution. When I say get the project, it is a product launch for full suite site monitoring, including audio and gas detection quantification.
Yeah, and I think that this kind of jumps into the next section that you've mentioned so much. But tell us a little bit more about well check systems. We understand that it's well site intelligence, but give us a little bit more. How does it work for the users?
Sure. So for the past, well, for the let's call this for the beginning 8 or 9 years of the company, we're doing well site cameras to give visualization into the well site from remote. Our chief technology officer, Mike Haynes, who is Hank's brother, he is, among other things, having been an IBM engineer, innovator of the year, patent holder, is also a full-time pastor. And as everyone knows, that's not a high-paying job. So to pay the bills and raise the family, he was working as a contract pumper on wells in the Tulsa area at night.
Mhm.
And one week after visiting a well site every single night, trying to get surveillance on it, he sent his brother Hank a video of a rhinoceros in Australia and said, "If I can watch this from my phone, we should be able to watch a well site from anywhere." And so they put together camera systems, and uh, they were actually a vendor of mine. And as time marched on, about 8 years into this, we'll say this is about 2021 or so, they had worked with a company, large integrated major, we'll just leave it at that, to do detection for compressors, acoustic anomalies. Listen to compressors in a very loud environment and look for anomalies. And they immediately found places where there were loose bolts, loose heat shields. In one case, it was a loose fuel line that had not yet released fuel, but that would have been a compressor fire and a failure of the entire installation. And they brought that to me and said, "Here's what we've developed. We've patented this process. We have this available." And I thought, well, that's really interesting. I don't own my compressors, but also, since I'm renting them, I don't have a lot of control over them. I'm reliant on a vendor to tell me how those are running for the most part. But I was in the middle of methane detection. And that's become a more and more important thing. Regulatory has marched on over time and become much more stringent in the way that wells are designed, the way they're monitored, as newer wells have higher requirements. And what we couldn't do with camera, you could see. Now you have sound, you could hear, but you couldn't. We say sight, sound, and smell. Although methane you can't smell, right? They have
Mhm.
to put an odorant in your methane so you can smell that. But VOCs, volatile organic compounds, you could. But if you don't have somebody on location, you don't know when that's occurring. And so we were trying to do methane detection with multiple different technologies. And I always say detecting methane's easy. There's six or more different types of technologies off the shelf right now that can tell you where methane is. And some of them are just sniffers. They just tell
Mhm.
you what the concentration is in the air, and you put several out, and it triangulates kind of where that came from. And there's others that can see or smell or detect that there's methane. Um, Quantifying methane, well, that's a little more difficult, but there are a number of different technologies that can tell you the amount of methane that's coming off the location. What it couldn't do is differentiate between process emissions, things that we already know about, and fugitive emissions that you didn't know about. And when I would get an alarm from the systems we trialed, it would be for anything that was happening. It might be for something we already knew about. A
Mhm.
compressor is always going to have some amount of methane from slip through the engine, incomplete combustion. That's just going to be a part of a mechanical process where there's a small amount there. I don't need an alarm for that. But if it alarms on everything, I don't know when it's something I need to do something about. So I coined the term. It alerted me about a needle in stacks of needles, not just a needle in a haystack.
Okay.
Everything looked like a needle.
Yeah.
Sometimes it was triangulating it so it's somewhere over there. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it looks like. I don't know what you need, but there was some amount of methane, and I'm telling you all the time, and you're just overloaded with
Yeah.
alarms. You don't know what's actionable. You don't know what you can go and fix. And so when Mike Haynes, our CTO, brought the acoustic anomaly, and what he was doing with acoustics is he was turning the sound into a 3D visualization of the sound. Okay.
Hmm.
And then then learning the normal process, saying here's a period where things are running properly, right? And then in a pattern recognition, you see where there's now a sound that was outside of the normal, and alarm on that. And since he was turning that into a visualization, it just made me think, well, will your algorithm apply to video? More specifically, would it apply to infrared video? He thought about it and said, theoretically, it would. So well, let's work on that. So 2.5 years later, here we are. Developed a system that can not only detect methane, it can quantify methane, and it can not only quantify methane, it can use a difference engine and know when that's not the normal for the pad, record everything, and then alarm when there's something that can be done. So typical in the oil and gas business is that you run routes. Okay. Whether
What
you
are
call your
routes?
person, right. So if you have oil and gas in
Hmm.
upstream are well sites that are distributed across a large area, right?
Okay.
Not one single installation, not
Hmm.
like a refinery, not like a
Yeah.
compressor station, but large area. And so a route is you're assigned, probably you're going to go to wells 1 through 10 twice a week. Okay. And I'm going to go through well sites 10 through 20,
Hmm.
or probably you're going to 120. I'm at 20 to 40. And we're going to go there and we're going to go inspect, and we're going to use sight, sound, and smell. Okay.
Okay.
But we're going to be there for half an hour or an hour. And then we're going to drive and spend quite a bit of time getting in our truck, moving to the next one, and run around. So will you call your people pumpers, used to be the name, or places people say well tenders. Now we say they're lease operators, but the job is the same. You're running a route, you're inspecting location, you're making minor repairs when you find them. But you think about being on location a half hour every couple of days, or even the newest of pads where you're there every day, you're there an hour. How much time is there not surveillance on that pad? Tremendous amount of time. So what we want to do is give full suite, full spectrum site surveillance, right,
Yeah.
with anomaly detection. Tell me when something's wrong. Don't tell me about the things I know about,
Yeah.
right? And in some cases where you are certifying your gas, are you familiar with that term?
No, to explain a little bit
Okay,
more about.
so there are several bodies, two most prominent, let's say there's three most prominent ones that look at how an operator runs their business,
Hmm.
how they monitor for emissions, how they manage their well sites, their safety, and they'll certify as a third party. They will say, we're certifying that this operator is being responsible about the way they're producing their oil and their gas.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So if you were a power company and you wanted to be sure, or you were an LNG supplier to Europe, and they say, look, we want to be sure we're buying gas from people who are being responsible about it. Right. So in those certification bodies, not only is there the regulatory, the EPA or the state regulators that tell you what you have to do with emission, but then there's now the certification bodies that also say how you want to respond to that. And so if you alarm on every single process emission, and you don't know that, and you don't know the difference, every time you've spent time explaining something that was already known is just a minute of your life you're never going to get back, right?
Right.
And you become this sea of alarms and sea of information overload. And I think that's really where AI is going to end up landing. Is going to make us more efficient. It's going to make humans capable of ingesting large amounts of information and showing us the attributes of that data that we need to know about. And I think that's
Yeah,
the
and that's
future.
actually kind of leads into my question that I wanted to ask is obviously you guys are collecting a large number of data as you're kind of explaining here, and you're trying to refine it so it's not overwhelming to the final users. So you're mentioning that that's kind of one of your main points here. How are you doing that right now? Is it through AI or is there
It
what
is.
are kind of
It
yeah.
is. So we call that a longitudinal pattern recognition that says here's what normal looks like. Okay. And so it's our simple example of overly simplifying that is it sees a cat, sees a cat, sees a cat, sees a cat. Suddenly it sees a horse, a dog, and a pig. It doesn't know what those are. So you tell it that's an anomaly. So now the pattern recognition knows that I'm always looking for these kinds of cats, even though there's ones that look differently. I know what a cat is. Now I know what a horse and a dog and a pig is, and I can alarm on that. So it's a different engine.
Right.
It's telling you how the site ought to sound, how the site ought to look, and again, smell. IR, right? Infrared, whether or not you have emissions that are outside of the small and normal that you would have called process emissions.
Okay. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And so for the users, now they don't have to necessarily go on site as often as prior. And then what are they seeing at the end? Is there a dashboard? What does that look like to
Yep.
the walls?
Yeah, good question. So we have our own user interface, a dashboard where the videos come up, the alarms, but also we send that out in whatever format that we need to, whether that's email or text. Um,
Mm,
so we can send a text with a secure link so that only the operator can get in. And then the videos then have a timeline where you could go back and go see,
yeah.
the well site. So, and then from there, then we can kick out API to whatever systems someone is using for recording emissions or for maintenance practices.
Hmm.
And then we would kick that out that they can upload into their systems.
Does it connect to ERP systems?
Yes,
Yeah,
correct. Yeah,
like the
you could
SMP.
pull all that in. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Very, very interesting. And then, how are they being installed? Is it somebody from your team who comes in, or is it pretty easy installation? And also, what happens to the pumpers that used to go around? Have they now upgraded their jobs?
Right.
What's happened to
Right.
those people?
So we install it on a mast, and the mast extends so that we can bring them
Mhm.
down for maintenance and extend that up. So we put that on our own mast, and we put the camera, the microphone system, the IR camera system on there, whatever level, right, of monitoring we want to do on location. So you take legacy old wells that are running well, have lower regulatory requirements and lower maintenance requirements. You may only want to just have a camera on there and you're going to have somebody
Mhm.
go by on occasion, all the way to a new site
Mhm.
where you're going to want to have full suite surveillance across that. So we can we can build that out site specific, then take even remote cameras. You think behind, in, around, behind tanks, behind production equipment, you can't see from one site. So then we have small, cheap remote cameras that can also be part of that full surveillance. So we go install that. What we do is it's a fee for service. We own the equipment, we upgrade, we maintain the equipment. That way it doesn't go out of warranty on a customer in the midst of them using that in the middle of a contract. We're always responsible then for maintaining that. Very good question. That's exactly the one of the right questions to ask. What happens with the operators? So in today's world, what investors want from upstream oil and gas is holding production flat, slow growth. We're past the days of large growth, right? Where there was no revenue, there was no free cash flow revenue. There was just growth of the company.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's become a value play. And so we always say we're in no growth mode. And I said, well, now every well makes a little less today than it made yesterday, right? They all decline. Okay. As pressure depletes, it makes less production out
Mhm.
through the life of the well. So in order to hold company production up, you're going to drill new wells.
Yeah.
You're going to acquire new wells. You're going to drill new wells. You're going to have a growth in assets. Okay. So I always said, true, we're in no growth mode in production and revenue. But if you're in operations, we're growing assets every month, every quarter, every year, and drilling new ones. Now you have the same amount of revenue with more and more assets to manage. And you end up will hire an army of people to manage these well sites. And what I always wanted to do, and what we did, was apply technology to slow the growth. of new people in the organization to manage more and more and more wells.
Mm-hmm.
So your operators should become maintenance techs. They should be responding to what needs to be done rather than going out and surveilling and inspecting to see what could be done. And as you grow assets, then you aren't laying people off, I don't think. I think as you evolve your operations and operate by exception, right? You find the exception on the well site, and that's what you're going to go and address. When your people are doing that, they're being more productive. They're not wasting miles,
Yep.
going to a well site if there's a problem. They know there's something that needs to at least be inspected and investigated and probably repaired. So, you know, there's systems out there, and I tried many of them and know all of them. And they're giving you alarms when there is not a problem. So you're still on that routine inspection, that route inspection periodically. And they're based on technologies. We're in the infrared band. There's the shortwave that needs sunlight. And so you can only monitor IR during the daytime. There's midwave, which are very well understood. There's many different companies out there, and they're also very
Yep.
expensive, and the life of that equipment is short. Those are expensive installations. And then there's Longwave, and it's a little harder to detect and quantify on Longwave, but it's less expensive. The cameras we build are less expensive than what others are using out there. It just requires the ability to know how to go about detecting and quantifying in a long wave range of IR. So our view is that this makes customers more efficient than the cost of our installation. The people cost, the reduction and the avoidance of hiring and the avoidance of buying more gas detection cameras for inspection, that more than offsets what we would charge a customer to put that surveillance there. And that's how we're going to build out. Yeah.
Yeah, and so this is a very simple price versus cost, right? Situation where it's pretty obvious that hopefully it should lead to more revenue because you're reducing costs, given the price doesn't change. Of course, that's not always the case with oil and gas or the production they're making, but
The product cost, the product revenue goes up and down,
yeah,
but every bit of product that goes into the atmosphere is product that isn't being sold, no matter what the price is.
great.
This is lost revenue. Every leak is a profit signal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so in your case, like obviously you're seeing companies in the space adopt this technology or not. But the ones who are adopting the technology, what's the process like for them to make that decision? And besides just looking at, the price costs, what's making them kind of make that move?
Sure. And there are, multiple companies, as I said, out there providing, surveillance and quantification through different technologies. But in my view, having been in their shoes, I say I've walked 1,000,000 miles in their steel-toed boots,
Hmm.
done the job in there, know what you do for a living, know what your day is like. And it can't be the operations guy that wants to do something new. It can't be the regulatory folks. It can't be the legal staff. It can't be the financial staff. It has to be the entire team,
Hmm.
right? Because you're going to change the way that you do things. You're going to change the way that you meet the regulatory requirements. Then you have to change the way that you operate and the way that your people visit the locations because there's an additional cost that I'm going to charge you that I want to help you offset.
Yeah.
So we see it as uh, a, a customer needs to have the kind of forward thinking staff across the disciplines that thinks there's a better way to do this. I just haven't found the widget that lets me do it. I've tried things and they give me a needle and a stack of needles and it hasn't changed my business. It's just given me surveillance and cost, but there's no offset. And so that's the customers we're wanting to target.
How do you find them? And how do you convince all of them? So this is more maybe in leading to your sales strategy here, but how does
Sure, sure. Well, for one thing, I've been in the business for 33 years. I've I know a few folks, right? So reaching out to people we know, and just networking, right?
Mhm.
And knowing people. Um, there's also conferences. We're going to go speak at the Methane Mitigation Summit in Houston in June, and we'll meet and talk to people there. We also are building relationships with consulting groups that are doing environmental consulting, and they have existing clients that their compliance and regulatory and risk management that they don't have is full suite 24-hour-a-day surveillance of the locations that could help them go find intermittent leaks.
Uh-huh.
It isn't the large leak that's continuous, it turns out. The studies have shown that's not actually where you would think that's the largest portion of emissions from oil and gas, but it's not. It's the short, intermediate things that happen on occasion that you don't catch for that one periodic, once a quarter typically, period where you're scanning a location and you don't see it. Then
Mhm.
it goes on for an entire another quarter before you might have a chance again to catch that. So if they're missing that part of surveillance and they have the confidence in those consulting groups, then we want to work through them to offer a fuller suite of compliance and risk management.
That totally makes sense. And then you also kind of touched on your competitors and how you guys are doing things slightly different. Do you think that what's kind of influencing that is you mentioned that you guys have a sister company called SEQTEK that's more on the software development side of things. Do you guys think you have that custom software development experience and more of that digital technical background mixed with the physical technical background to come together? Or what do you think is really?
I think that's right. I think there is a tremendous amount of experience in artificial intelligence. I think there's a tremendous amount of experience in detection systems, whether that's laser based, whether that's infrared, whether that's lidar. Um, what isn't typically embedded into others is the boots on the ground, oil and gas. Been there and done that. I understand your world. So we have members of our team like myself, been part of upstream operations in multiple basins over decades, understanding what can and can't be done with periodic inspection of a location. You cannot man a well site 24/7 with all the disciplines that be necessary to understand that. The SCADA technician and the operator and the chemical specialist and the compressor specialist and all the people that touch that well site on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis cannot be there 24/7. But a control room, given the right kind of data, culling through the data so they're not overwhelmed,
Mhm.
would know when there's something happening before it becomes a real problem. You get in your car and you drive it every day, and you get in your car one day and
Something's
something
off.
doesn't sound right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You may or may not know how to repair a set of brakes, but you know that there's something going wrong with those brakes before it's time to go fix it. But if you ignore it, right, more damage is done the longer it goes between detection of events. And the same thing is true of leaks. The same thing is true of sound anomalies on whether that's your compressor or valving or any other part of the system and pumps. There are signals prior to the catastrophic that can be picked up if you have 24/7 surveillance.
Yeah. And I guess to kind of round things off here, so with all this new technology coming out that you're also bringing to the industry, what do you think young professionals who are looking to get into the energy sector today, what skill sets should they be focusing on? Should it be, more engineering? Should it be generalist? Should it be more digital engineering and emerging digital technologies? Or
Oil and gas is always going to need a staff of engineers and innovators. It's always going to need a staff of accountants and landmen and legal and financial. That staff is going to be there. But what I think AI is going to do, I'm not fearful that it's going to take over the world. I asked, we'll just say one of the built-in AI systems, hey, will you fill in my calendar for me with all these events that are available? And it completely and totally failed. It was unable to do that. I'm
yeah.
not worried it's going to take my job away. if it can't fill my calendar in. But I know that if I don't use it to be more efficient at what I do, if I don't use AI, if I don't have the technical skills to use that properly, to ask the right questions, to think critically about what it's telling me and verify whether that's an hallucination or a true,
Mm.
um, a true insight from AI. If I don't do that, someone else will take my job. That's where that I think is going to happen.
Yeah, so I think what you're saying here, and it's really that idea of critical thinking and being able to understand if something's just noise or if it is actually, something valid that we need to take care of. Um, so I think that's great advice there. But yeah, thank you so much, John, for
Absolutely.
joining the podcast here today. Where can we find you? Where can we find Well Checked and systems, and how can we go about to connecting?
Sure. We're simply wellchecked.com, and we're well checked on LinkedIn and well checked on Facebook, and we'll be at conferences and getting our word out as we do this product launch of our new offerings.
Yeah, what's your next conference that you're attending?
Uh, Currently, the Methane Mitigation Summit in early June in Houston.
Okay, awesome. That's
Yeah,
super exciting.
yeah, it is.
Thank you so much, John. Look forward to talking to you soon.
Absolutely. Again, thank you for looking at what we were doing and showing an interest. Thanks for the invitation. I appreciate the time.